We all have to earn our place in this world. A sentiment that gives motivation to those less fortunate than the citizens of Piltover. Contrary to what its moniker would have you believe, the City of Progress offers little to those born in the underground, a place where the negligence of the city's government has created an environment rich in abuse and exploitation of the vulnerable. Those unfortunate enough to be born here need something to push them towards survival, and the idea that someone can earn their way to a better standard of living is just the thing to do it. Violet, or Vi as she prefers, is no different to the influence of such an idea. A girl with physical strength just as overwhelming as the weight she carries on her shoulders. With incredible acrobatics, combat experience, and unshaken confidence, Vi is someone who gives hope for being able to overcome a city that has neglected her. But she also endures a responsibility that has dire consequences if not handled properly. Parenting. As a parentified child, Vi has to look after her little sister Powder as well as her own survival. It's not impossible for a parent to raise a resilient child under stressful conditions, but how can we expect that responsibility from another child? What Vi has to struggle with is undeserved, but for as much as we want to complain about it, the world keeps moving, and the impact of such a role remains real. Hear me out. Let's explore this unfair reality by discussing Vi, the Parentified Child. A parentified child refers to, well, a child who has unwillingly taken on the responsibility of a parent. The process of how this happens is called parentification, a distortion in the parent-child relationship where a child's personal needs are suppressed in order to take care of the needs of the parent. For whatever reason, the parent in the relationship has transferred their adult responsibility onto their child, forcing the child to mature rapidly at the cost of their childhood security. To others outside of the family, these children are often seen as very mature for their age, and that's because they were forced to be. Vi has exceptional survival instincts because she had to grow up faster than necessary due to the circumstances that left her and Powder without a family. This is a struggle for Vi during Arcane, dealing with the responsibility of being a parent while still being a child herself. At the end of Act 1, Vi gets separated from Powder and is imprisoned. Based on the Council archives, we know that Vi was approximately 17 when this happened. Therefore, the family dynamic we see on screen before her imprisonment is happening during her adolescence. And considering that Vi was significantly younger when she was orphaned, we can assume that this dynamic has existed for a long time. Vi manages the role of leader for this group of kids.
I took us there. If you want to be mad at me, but you're the one who always says we have to earn our place in this world.
I also told you.
Everyone looks to Vi for decision-making, she organizes them for their jobs, she tries her best to keep the peace between the group. However, she balances this with being a caretaker for Powder as well, prioritizing her physical safety and emotionally consoling her when she needs it.
You want to talk about today?
What's the point? I ruined everything. I always do.
Nobody said that.
No, just that you were twice the person at half my age.
These are visible signs of Vi's adult responsibilities. It's not hard to spot in children instrumental examples of parentification, such as what we see from Vi. These behaviors are easily noticeable and can include doing the household chores, taking care of younger siblings, or even working actual jobs outside of school to be one of the family's sources of income. Before we go any further, it is important that we distinguish the difference between parentification and healthy discipline. Giving your child responsibility over certain chores once in a while isn't a bad thing. It's a good way to teach valuable skills while also giving them some healthy discipline so that they are prepared to live on their own one day. So it's not inherently bad for Vi to have experiences like these, where she can practice how to be a leader and an emotionally supportive person. Minus the thievery and brutality. Parentification happens when there's the expectation that the child will always be the one handling these adult responsibilities. That a 9-year-old will be expected to cook every day, otherwise the family starves. A 10-year-old will be expected to keep the house clean from top to bottom. Or a 12-year-old will be in charge of making sure their sibling makes it to school well-fed and properly dressed. Every single morning. This isn't healthy discipline at this point. It's a child being a surrogate parent. And that is what's at the core of parentification. Vi's experience definitely draws parallels to instrumental parentification, but I can't neglect to mention the other, more indirect form of parentification. Emotional parentification is when the child takes care of their parents' emotional or psychological needs. You can think of the child as taking on the role of a counselor or a therapist, with neither the education, training, nor the maturity to handle such a job. These parents may vent to their kids or even ask for advice about issues involving work, their friends, or other family members. It's an emotional violation of personal boundaries and puts the child into an impossible situation. They don't want to be responsible for their parents' mental health, but they also don't want to disappoint the person who's been taking care of them, especially when they have to live in the same home with them. It's a less obvious form of parentification, but just as destructive. Regardless of the form, parentification causes the child to suppress their own needs to satisfy their parents' needs. It can be exploitative because even though the child may agree to take on this responsibility, are they really in any position to say no? And in some cases, there is no opportunity for an agreement. Such is the case of Vi, someone who had to do what was necessary for survival. Parentification can happen for many different reasons, and not all of them are intentional. Sometimes parents are just overwhelmed by a lot of responsibilities and can't be fully present, such as a single-parent household with multiple children. There's also divorced households and scenarios where the parents are deceased. In these cases, parentification happens as a result of unfortunate circumstances that, most likely, the parents wouldn't have wanted for their children to experience. We've already mentioned that Vi is an orphan, but I'm sure most of you are wondering, what about Vander, Vi's adoptive father? Since he's clearly invested in the safety of these children, wouldn't he have kept Vi from being parentified? Well, it's possible, but Vi was taken in by a man who had a lot of responsibility. Vander not only manages a business by himself, but he's also a recognized leader of the underground city, which I'm going to refer to as Zon for the rest of the video. Thus, he's not only looking after 4 children as a single parent, but he's also responsible for the safety of people in an entire section of a city, people who have been abandoned and forgotten by their government, while doing his best to maintain a fragile mutual agreement with the Wardens, Piltover's police force that frequently terrorizes Zon with their enforcers. This man was a single parent balancing a lot, so it's completely understandable why Vi had to take on more of the responsibility as well. At the end of the day, parents are human beings. Despite their best efforts, they can get stressed, tired, and overwhelmed just as any other person. So Vi has 2 potential reasons for being a parentified child. We've been discussing the details of parentification for a while now, but I'm sure some of you are wondering, why does any of this matter? What are the risks to a person's psychological development for us to dedicate so much of our time to understanding this type of family dynamic? Intense anger. Now, to be fair, Vi has plenty of reasons to be mad at the world. Her parents were killed by enforcers, her family is forced to work for scraps while their city's government continues to neglect them, Her home is left at the mercy of criminal syndicates that abuse their population for capital, and enforcers continue to terrorize her city in the name of law and order. In this scenario, being a parentified child is like adding more fuel to the fire, because despite how much she loves Powder, she never asked to be her parent. Vi was placed into an incredibly demanding role to fulfill while she was a child herself. A child that was just as deserving of care and protection in this world. Who wouldn't be angry at how unfair this is? As adults, parentified children come to understand how burdened they've felt by handling things that were beyond their comprehension at the time. This causes them to have a love-hate relationship with their parents because they recognize that these people care about them and tried their best to raise them, but they still shackled them with responsibilities they didn't deserve as a child. Imagine being brought into this world only to shoulder someone else's responsibilities. It's not like children ask to be born in the first place. The resentment that forms over the years is what's at the heart of this anger. But sometimes the person may not even be aware of it. This touches on the second drawback of such an experience: issues with intimacy. Since this was a family dynamic that they've had for most of their developmental years, parentification has the potential to carry over to their other relationships, friendships, other family members, boyfriends, girlfriends. Therefore, the parentified child may take up a similar role of caretaker with others, but may get angry with them when the person suddenly becomes a reminder of the childhood burdens they had. It's why, despite Vi's angry disposition towards practically anyone, she still remains very protective of the people in her life. It's her natural instinct at this point, even if she never asked to be this way in the first place. This unchecked anger is not good for establishing intimacy with someone. No one wants to be thought of as the parent of their friend or, even worse, their relationship partner. And no one wants to be the undeserving target of someone else's anger. Parentification makes it harder to establish a meaningful connection with people, and the unchecked anger can cause harm to someone innocent. Look no further than the sister she swore to protect, Jinx. The tragedy of Vi and Jinx's relationship is definitely character-driven, but also built on a foundation of unfortunate and completely unfair circumstances. By the end of the season, Powder completely identifies as the monster that everyone surrounding them painted her to be, now going by Jinx, the name of her reborn identity. As the black sheep of the family, Powder only had Vi as her connection that kept her stable in this world. Hence, why she makes Vi responsible for choosing her identity in the dinner scene, a scene that beautifully encapsulates Vi's role as a parentified child. However, let's first rewind time a bit and take a moment to talk about one of my favorite scenes in the show. When Powder lovingly embraces Vi, and she looks up to see this look on Vi's face. At this moment, Vi just witnessed the death of a friend and her adoptive father being kidnapped. This would naturally be distressing for anyone, but keep in mind that Vi is still a teenager, and we see that she's trying her hardest not to break down in front of Powder, similar to how a parent would try to avoid distressing their child. Even in a moment of vulnerability like this, Vi tries to keep Powder in mind, but she couldn't do it, and ends up involving the others in a situation that is overwhelming for any teenager, let alone a child like Powder. Vi clearly understands the impact she has on Powder, but it's hard to protect a child from distressing events like this when you're a teenager who doesn't have much experience processing your own emotions because you've had to take care of others your whole life. And that is what makes their relationship so tragic. Vi is mature enough to understand the responsibility she has over Powder, but is ill-equipped to live up to such a demanding role, because she was also a child that needed to be taken care of. Without the guidance from an adult, Vi's unchecked anger remains a threat to any relationship she's involved with. We can see this happen with Powder. Although Vi does her best to be patient, her anger does eventually reach a tipping point. The music video Enemy offers some fantastic visuals of the characters and highlights what their daily life looks like. I understand a music video may be a questionable source of canon, but I'm gonna use it anyway, because why else would they animate all of this if not to enhance the story? In it, we see Vi yelling at Powder in between moments of them happily playing together. A visual that captures their dynamic well. Both of them are still sisters that enjoy their time playing together, but Vi is still the parent that has to scold her for her mistakes. Vi's anger as the parentified child would naturally come out during these moments, because it's a reminder of the unfair burden placed on her. She may not directly think of Powder, the individual, as a burden, but the responsibility of parenting will always be a burden for any child when it's forced on them. The anger that comes from that responsibility will show itself either passively or explosively. The most devastating of these outbursts being when she calls Powder a Jinx. Before Vi is captured and imprisoned, she flies into a fit of anger and punches Powder. She then holds her little sister's face and calls her a Jinx. A moment truly terrifying for Powder. Granted, Vi does this after Powder's invention causes an explosion that accidentally gets Vander and her adoptive brothers killed. So it's understandable why Vi would be distraught after a traumatic experience such as that. But let's remember that Vi is still a teenager at this point in the story. While an adult may be able to possess the emotional restraint to realize Powder's anguish over her well-intended but fatal mistake, a teenager can't be expected to be able to do the same. We can't expect a teenager to have the patience and emotional intelligence to hold back during a situation like this. Hell, even some adults lack these skills. Although an outburst like this is absolutely disastrous for Powder's well-being, especially after all the shit she's taken from everyone else in her life, it is unfortunately understandable for Vi to have reacted in the way that she did. Vi is an angry teenager just as devastated as Powder over the loss of her adoptive family. But who's going to console her? The crying child in front of her? The one she's had to prioritize over herself for most of her life? This moment of anger is something Vi comes to deeply regret as an adult, who is now mature enough to understand what Powder really needed during that moment. It wasn't Vi's fault that she got kidnapped before she could run back to Powder, but Vi still said what she said, and left Powder alone. For Powder, she genuinely believed she had been abandoned, and Vi must be aware of this by now. Just like with any other parent, Vi can't take that moment back, and undo the impact of her actions that shaped Powder for years. Which brings us back to the dinner scene. The moment Vi truly gets to see the damage her anger has caused Powder. It's fitting that Vi is seated at the table as if she's one of the heads of the household. Even though she was only a teenager at the time, she still influenced Powder's development as any other parent would. The tragic reality is that the damage is done, even if it was unfair for Vi to be in that position in the first place. You know, this entire time I've been talking about how shitty these circumstances have been for Vi. It's easy for someone on the outside to simply criticize aspects of someone else's experience. But what about solutions? If we know everything we've talked about is bad, then how could we have avoided this with the current setting of the world she lives in? You couldn't. The reality is that there wouldn't have been any way for Vi and Powder to survive for as long as they have if Vi didn't grow up faster. We could argue that Vander should have done a better job of recognizing Vi's needs, but he's also someone who grew up in Zon and had to simply endure a mountain of responsibility for his survival. I can see why Vander would take a look at Vi, a child who seems more emotionally mature than she should be at her age, and try to encourage her to embrace the role of caretaker. This is like when parents tell their oldest child that they have to be the man or the woman of the house now, during times of crisis. The intention may be to foster their child's independence, but this child is left to carry the family trauma without help or guidance from their parents. That trauma could make them more resilient, but at what cost? This is where intention and impact often clash when it comes to parenting. Parents may do things with the intention of making their child stronger, but the actual impact may be more devastating than what they could have imagined. Vander may have been well-intentioned, but making Vi embrace the responsibility she was burdened with only increased the pressure she already felt and fueled her anger even more. But at the same time, what other options were there for them as orphans in Zon? Despite the apparent necessity, Vi will forever have to deal with the repercussions of her burdens and live with the knowledge that she failed to live up to that responsibility when, in reality, she was set up for failure from the start. This is a sour note to end the video on, but just like the consequences of parenting, it is what it is. There's no way for me to really sugarcoat the unfair tragedy that is Vi's upbringing, but I think this melancholy is a testament to how real Vi's character feels in Arcane. I love this show, and I would love to talk more about it, so if you'd like to see more videos on other characters, then subscribe now and hit the bell icon. If you'd like to make a one-time donation to support my work directly, you can find links to my donation accounts in the description below. And as always, my people, thank you for watching.